Hi everybody, and thank you again for watching another episode of Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at this extremely compact 150 watt bi-color COB light made by these guys. The light has a CCT range from 2700 Kelvin up to 6,500 Kelvin, and it has the run-of-the-mill special effects. So this is fire, for example. We'll also take a look at the optional softbox. All right, let's start off the episode with the regular disclaimers. I am not getting paid any money to review this product, but they did send me the product for free, and I do get to keep it or sell it at the end of the review. So technically, that is a paid endorsement. Okay, let's go into the pros and cons straight away, starting off with the cons to get those out of the way. Now, the first list of cons is a little bit unfair on the product because it's not made for a professional lighting technician like me, but this is a professional lighting technician's YouTube channel, so I'm going to mention them anyway. It doesn't have any DMX, it doesn't have any CRMX, it doesn't have green and magenta correction, it doesn't have an IP weather protection rating, and it doesn't track to the daylight or Planckian curve. Okay, let's get into some more realistic negatives now, taking into consideration the cost of the product. The kit here is sold with a bow and mount adapter. Now, it wouldn't have taken a lot of effort to make this bow and mount adapter way better. This thing is probably the flimsiest thing in the whole kit. So if you're hoping to put a 5-foot modifier on this, I wouldn't risk it. I think it'd be quite okay with a 3-foot modifier, but that would be the extent of it. Okay, the next negative is going to get a little bit nerdy. We're going to get into color science. So at its lowest Kelvin, 2700, the white point on this light is arguably perfect. And the same can be said at the other end, 6,500 Kelvin. So why is that a negative? Well, it's a negative because this light is a strictly bi-color light with no green and magenta correction. That means it's going to track linear between those 2 points and not track to the Planckian curve. So that means that our key Kelvins that we use more often, like 3200 and 5600 Kelvin, this light is going to be skewing magenta because it's underneath that curve. Now at 3200 Kelvin, it's magenta to more than the equivalent of a 1/4 correction gel, which is too much for me personally. The next negative will be if you're trying to run this off V-mount batteries that are 14.4 or 14.8 volt. The maximum brightness you can run the light at is 50%, but that's not my negative. When the battery gets down to about 20%, the maximum brightness you can run the light at is 38%. So here's my negative. You could be halfway through a shoot and then your brightness changes. That's a really bad idea. The next negative for me is that it doesn't have a baby pin receiver. It uses a thread. This really limits your choice of light stands and also the gripping that you can use. Now the last couple of negatives for me, this would be a really awesome setup if I could somehow attach a battery directly to the light and not have to run a cable. And this is my last negative, and it's a bit of a backhanded compliment. This is a really well constructed softbox. I think it's the best mini softbox I've ever come across. And here's my negative with it. It only fits to this brand of light. And that really is a disappointment because if this fitted onto my 4s or 60s, I would buy 4 of these tomorrow. It is that good. Okay, so let's get into the pros. The build quality of the light is actually pretty good, especially for the price of it. The build quality of the softbox, as I've said, is absolutely superb. Now, the next pro. So this is arguably a pro, arguably not. The cooling fans. Now, some people say these fans are a bit loud. I'm going to disagree and say these fans are pretty quiet. So at the moment, I've got the fan running at full speed. This is as loud as it will get. Now, here's why I think this is a quiet fan. I've done a lot of reviews of lights. If you're going to have a light that's this small and this compact, you're relying on the fan because you don't have a big heat sink in there. So relative to the size of the light, this is a very quiet fan. If you want something that's quieter, you're going to need a bigger light with a bigger heat sink. All right, now the next pro for this thing is the size. Clearly the light is made for somebody who needs to travel light, not somebody like me. The next pro is the reflector. It does a fantastic job. We'll talk about that in a sec. And the last pro for me, 2700 Kelvin on this is absolutely superb. And if you use it with the candle effect, I think it makes a really good fire effect. That's pretty good. You know, it's very hard to find a light that looks this natural as a candle light or as a fire source. All right, let's go through cost and what you get. Now, before we get into that, I just want to mention that there is an optional extra softbox that is available for it, which is quite well constructed. We'll talk about this in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about this kit first, which is the C150X combo kit. It sells for $371. That's its regular listing, but it looks like it's on sale at the moment for $296 US. And if you're paying with Australian dollars, its regular listing is $459, and it is currently on sale for $377. So there's a link to their website in the top of the description below the video. So just go to there, you will find the link. All right, so I've taken everything out of the box just to speed up the process here and go through what you get. Now, the one thing that's worth noting is you don't get a bag. All right, so you get your service card. You also get, what's this? Your warranty card, which have QR codes on them. You get your power supply. Now your power supply has a little hook here for mounting it onto your light stand, and you've got plenty of lead here to connect to your light, even if your light's at the top of your light stand. You get your regional power cable, which is an IEC connection. Now you also get in this kit a V-mount plate, so you can run this light from a V-mount battery. And you also get a G-clamp. Now the G-clamp connects to the back of the plate and locks in. And you can also pull the safety here to disconnect it. So once you've got this secured to your stand, the plate can't easily come off. It has to take a little bit of deliberate effort to do it. And the G-clamp is a little bit limited, so you couldn't put it on, say, a combo stand, for example. Now the battery attaches to the light via a D-tap adapter cable. Now running off a 26 volt V-mount battery, I can run the light all the way up to 100% brightness. But if I'm running off a fully charged 14.4 or 14.8 volt V-mount battery, I can only get a maximum 50% brightness. And when the battery's at 20%, that reduces to 38% brightness. Now with the light, it has a mini bow and mount style connection. Now mini bow and mounts are not standard, so they're different from brand to brand, unfortunately. Now the next thing in the kit is a bow and mount to mini bow and mount adapter, so that you can use this light with other bow and mount modifiers. So here's the thing to note. I would suggest only using this with softbox modifiers like domes and lanterns. If you're hoping to use a Fresnel or an optical accessory, the LEDs are placed quite a distance back from the bow and mount because of the adapter. So the alignment is going to be very ordinary. So if you're using a Fresnel, for example, it'll be way spottier than it should be because the LEDs are further back. Now this mount also has an umbrella mount on it, so you could use it for your umbrellas. And the whole lot then attaches to your light stand here via the baby pin receiver. Now, in terms of the build quality of the locker on the adapter, I would feel a bit anxious about putting something as large as, say, a 5-foot dome on the front of this. I'd be more than happy putting a 3-foot, but I think putting a 5-foot on might be pushing your luck. The next thing in the kit is a tilter. Now, this tilter attaches to the bottom of the light. And in order to do so, you've got to press the safety release. Now in the bottom of the tilter here is your thread, which you can use to mount the handle or mount to a light stand. Now if I want to get really critical with this tilter, my criticism is that the locker is on the left side, not the right side. So it's orientated left to loosen, not right to tighten. But one pro on this is the tilter is all metal construction and it has a ratchet handle. The next thing in the kit is a handle which screws onto the bottom of the tilter. And you can also use the handle as a floor stand. And the last thing in the kit is the faceted reflector. Now this is a really good quality reflector. Not only is it slightly frosted so you don't get any hot spots, but it's double skinned. So the inside of the reflector is made of metal and the outside is made of plastic. So if you were to drop this onto a surface, you won't dent the reflector. Now the construction of the light is mostly plastic, but it is very solidly constructed. On the front you've got the COB, which is protected by a safety glass so you won't get insects fry into it. Below that is the release for the mount. On the side you've got 2 control knobs which are recessed so they can't get easily damaged. On the back you've got a small black and white LED for the user interface, but the back of the light mostly consists of the cooling fan. And on the bottom of the light, you've got your power in, which also has a USB-C connection. If you're using a PD100 battery, you can run the light at a maximum 60% brightness. If you've got a PD65 battery, you can run the light at a maximum 38% brightness, and you're limited to only 18% if you've got a PD30 battery. Now let's take a look at the user interface. The top knob adjusts your CCT when you roll it, and it's adjustable in 100 Kelvin increments. And the bottom knob adjusts your brightness, which is adjustable in 1% increments. To go to the effects mode, just press the top rocker. Now this is the candle effect, which in my opinion makes a pretty good fire effect. To change your effect, just rotate the top button. And it's got your run-of-the-mill special effects that most lights have. If you want to get into the operating menu, long hold the top button. You've got a choice of your fan settings here. With the fan set to H or high or automatic, you can run the light at up to 100% brightness. With the fan set to medium, you're limited to 50% brightness, and with the fan off, you're limited to 10% brightness. The other option here in the menu is your Bluetooth on and off for the phone app. Let's take a look at how the light performs with no modifiers attached. And this is a striped orientated COB. But despite that, there doesn't seem to be any artifacting. In fact, the colour is very consistent, even through the drop-offs towards the edge of the beam. Regardless of the colour that you dial in. And the shadows are also very crisp. Now let's take a look with the supplied reflector. Now this is a faceted reflector, but it's not as shiny as other reflectors. It seems to have a little bit of frosting on it. Now this frosting might cost a little bit in light level, but I actually really like what the reflector's doing. For a faceted reflector, it's got a very even distribution of light across its beam, and no hotspot. And for a reflector, the shadows are very impressive. Okay, so let's take a look at the optional softbox. This is the QR40 and it's sold in this very well constructed bag. The dome is made of a quality reflective material. The stitching is superb. It's got a generous amount of Velcro for mounting your modifiers, and the hinges are a nice solid construction. All right, so let's go through assembling this now. So you just grab hold of the Velcro here and undo that. Then grab the hinge here and give it a pull. It'll lock into place and you're ready to go, as simple as that. Now if you want to pack it up, just pull on the two locks here, it'll unfold, and then just wrap the Velcro strap around and stick it back in the bag. Okay, so let's have a look at it now mounted to the light with the carry handle. And I think this is where this could come in really handy. Now I've got it set to the maximum brightness it would be at if you're running it off a PD 100 battery. All right, so I think it does have a reasonable amount of brightness in there. So if you were, say, about that far away from a person, I reckon you could use it as a fill light on their face outside, and you could definitely use it as an eye light. At night, you'd probably have to dim it. So I do think it is quite usable in this form factor. So let's give it a bit more of a run through in the workshop here. Now, the grid that's supplied does do a pretty good job. And much to my surprise, all of the cell walls are individually sewn. Let's take a look at the softbox in combination with the grid first. And now without the grid attached. Now it's not going to give you an incredibly soft light source because it is a small softbox, but it will do a reasonable job of rounding out the shadows at a distance of about 1 meter. Now let's take a look at the data I've collected on the light, starting off with the AC power draw. The maximum AC power draw recorded over several days of testing was 164 watts. At 100% brightness at 3200 Kelvin, I recorded 161 watt, and at 5600 Kelvin, I recorded 158 watt. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics. And according to my frequency meter, this light is running at roughly 20 kilohertz. So you shouldn't have any issues with flicker. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics at 3200 Kelvin. And I've taken readings at 100%, 75%, 50%, 25%, 10%, and 5%. The CCT is very consistent. The TM30 color render score is a constant 96 all the way down to 5%, and the delta UV white point or green magenta shift is extremely consistent. It is way more magenta than I'd like it to be, but it is consistent. Now let's take a look at 5600 Kelvin. With the exception of 10% brightness, the CCT is reasonably consistent. The average color render score is 94% until you get down to 5% brightness where it actually goes up to 95. Now in terms of the color hue, towards your bottom of the dimming, the light does skew more towards green. But the total amount of shift is under the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel, so nobody's going to notice. Now let's take a closer look at some of the kelvins, starting off with no modifier attached. When I dialed in 2700 Kelvin, I got 2712. The TM30 color testing results were 96% color accuracy with an average 102% color saturation. All of the SIRUI scores are plus 90. The spectrum distribution is quite healthy. And the color hue is nearly perfect with a delta UV of minus 0.0004. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3203 with an SSI score of 85. The TM30 color testing results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 104% color saturation. With the SIRUI scores, R11 is the only one below 90 and only just. This is the spectrum distribution. And the light does have a magenta hue with a delta UV of minus 0.0046. This will give the light a magenta hue to roughly 1/3 more than a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5705 with an SSI score of 75. The TM30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 104% color saturation. With the SIRUI scores, only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0015. So if you're working to the Planckian curve, this light would be slightly magenta to about the equivalent of 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you're working to the daylight curve, this would be somewhere between a 1/8 and a 1/4 correction gel towards magenta. When I dialed in 6500 Kelvin, I got 6582. The TM30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. With the SIRUI scores, R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point is very close to the Planckian curve with a delta UV of plus 0.0005. Now let's take a look at the spectrometer readings at 3200 Kelvin and 5600 Kelvin with the supplied reflector on. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin with the supplied reflector, I got 3242 with an SSI score of 84. The TM30 color testing results were 96% average color accuracy with an average 104% color saturation. All of the SIRUI scores are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point comes in with quite a magenta hue at minus 0.0044 delta UV, which would place this light somewhere between a 1/8 and a 1/4 correction gel off the Planckian curve. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin with the supplied reflector, I got 5594 with an SSI score of 76. The TM30 color testing results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 103% color saturation. With the SIRUI scores, R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point comes in with a delta UV of minus 0.0013. So if you're working to the Planckian curve, this light will be slightly magenta to roughly 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you're working to the daylight curve, it'll be magenta to somewhere between a 1/8 and a 1/4 correction gel. Okay, let's take a look now at the spectrometer data at 3200 Kelvin and 5600 Kelvin with the light going through the optional dome. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin with the optional dome, I got 3182 with an SSI score of 85. The TN30 colour testing results were 96% average colour accuracy with an average 104% colour saturation. With the SIRUI scores, R11 is only just below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point comes in with a delta UV of minus 0.0036, which would make this light slightly magenta to a fraction more than the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5478 with an SSI score of 76. The TN30 colour testing results were 95% average colour accuracy with an average 103% colour saturation. With the SIRUI scores, R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0010. So if you're working to the Planckian curve, that would make the light slightly magenta to about 1/3 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you're working to the daylight curve, it'll be magenta to slightly more than the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. Okay, thank you for watching another episode of Gaffer and Gear. All right, just my closing thoughts. If you're maybe a documentary filmmaker or an ENG guy and you need to travel light, this could be of interest to you, but for me, it's a no. I honestly don't like how magenta it is at 3200 Kelvin, and I don't like the fact that if you're running it off a 14.4 or a 14.8 volt B-mount battery, it can change brightness halfway through your shooting. So for me, those two things are really bad ideas. But it does have a lot of positive stuff going for it. I mean, the build quality is sensational. The fans are nice and quiet. What you get value for money wise is superb, and this softbox is awesome. So even though it's a no for me, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on this brand because I'll be interested to see what they can make in a few years' time with a bit more experience. I'm Andrew Locke. Thank you for watching Gaffer and Gear.